She played the piano as if it were an extension of her own heartbeat, and for decades, Judy Bailey's music was a bridge between cultures, faiths, and generations. But behind the warmth and joy that defined her sound was a story of courage, resilience, and a lifelong mission to connect people through the universal language of jazz. Known as the First Lady of Jazz in New Zealand and a beloved figure in Australian music, Judy Bailey was far more than a performer. She was a composer, an educator, and a pioneer who broke barriers for women in jazz. Her career stretched across continents and decades, yet she never lost the personal touch that made her audiences feel as though she was playing just for them. Bailey's journey began in New Zealand, where her prodigious talent at the piano became evident early on. By the time she moved to Sydney in the 1960s, she was already a seasoned musician with an instinctive feel for improvisation and a style that could shift effortlessly between swing, bossa nova, and modern jazz. She quickly became a fixture in Australia's jazz scene, leading her own trios and quartets while collaborating with some of the most respected musicians in the country. But Bailey's legacy was not built on performance alone. She was deeply committed to teaching, serving for many years as a lecturer at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music. Generations of students remember her not just for her technical mastery, but for the way she encouraged them to find their own voices. "It's not about playing like someone else," she often said. "It's about telling your story." Her compositions carried the same philosophy, pieces that blended sophistication with accessibility, inviting listeners into a musical conversation. Whether she was performing in a packed concert hall or a small community venue, Bailey brought the same generosity of spirit, using her music to unite rather than divide. When news of her passing came, the jazz world in Australasia and beyond felt the loss deeply. Tributes poured in from former students, fellow musicians, and fans, all recalling the elegance of her playing, the kindness of her mentorship, and the quiet determination with which she navigated a male-dominated industry. Judy Bailey's story is not just about music, it's about what music can do when it's played with heart. And as her final notes fade, the question is how we will carry forward the harmony she worked so hard to create. To understand Judy Bailey's significance, you have to place her within the jazz landscape of the mid-20th century, a scene that was vibrant but overwhelmingly male. Born in Auckland, New Zealand in 1935, Bailey grew up during a period when women were often expected to be singers in jazz, not instrumentalists, and certainly not leaders of their own ensembles. Her decision to make the piano her voice and to lead from it was both bold and unconventional for the time. From an early age, Bailey showed remarkable aptitude at the keyboard. Classical training gave her technique and discipline, but it was the sound of jazz, swinging rhythms, lush harmonies, and the thrill of improvisation that captured her imagination. By the late 1950s, she was performing in New Zealand's small but dedicated jazz circles. Already earning respect for her fluid phrasing and her ability to make complex ideas sound effortless, the turning point came when she moved to Sydney in the early 1960s. Australia's jazz scene was expanding rapidly, with clubs, festivals, and a growing audience hungry for both traditional and modern styles. Bailey arrived ready to contribute and quickly became a fixture in the city's top venues. Her versatility allowed her to work in various contexts, from intimate trios to big bands, and she was equally at home playing standards, Brazilian bossa novas, or her own original compositions. Thematically, Bailey's career was driven by two interconnected forces: artistic authenticity and education. She believed that music had to come from an honest place, and she brought that philosophy into both her performances and her teaching. In 1977, she joined the faculty at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music, where she would remain for decades, influencing generations of Australian jazz musicians. Her students learned not just scales and theory, but how to listen deeply, how to communicate through music, and how to remain curious throughout their careers. Her own compositions often reflected her broad worldview. Pieces like Colors of My Dream and Horizons blended lyrical melodies with rhythmic vitality, drawing on influences from classical music, jazz, and the many cultural traditions she encountered in her travels. This openness to diverse musical languages became one of her defining characteristics, earning her respect across musical genres. Bailey was also a sought-after collaborator, performing with some of Australia's leading jazz artists, while also crossing into symphonic and chamber music projects. This ability to bridge worlds without losing her jazz identity made her unique. She did not see genres as walls but as doors that could be opened with the right key. The theme that emerges from Judy Bailey's story is connection, between teacher and student, between performer and audience, between the rich traditions of jazz and the evolving voices of each new generation. Her life's work was a testament to the idea that music is not static, but a living conversation, and that the truest measure of an artist is the legacy they leave in the hearts and hands of others. By the time she was honored with awards like the Order of Australia Medal, Bailey had already achieved something far greater. She had built a community that continues to thrive on the foundation she laid. Judy Bailey's rise was not the result of a single breakthrough performance, but the accumulation of years spent refining her voice at the piano, seizing opportunities, and proving herself in settings where women instrumentalists were rare. In Auckland during the 1950s, she built her reputation in small jazz clubs, where the intimacy of the setting allowed audiences to appreciate her fluid improvisation and harmonic sophistication. These early gigs taught her to adapt on the spot, to read the room, and to use silence as effectively as sound. By her early 20s, she was recognized as one of New Zealand's most promising pianists. The decision to move to Sydney in the early 1960s would define the rest of her career. Sydney's jazz scene was larger and more competitive, with venues like the El Rocco and the Wentworth Hotel drawing musicians who were hungry to push the music forward. Bailey quickly became part of this dynamic environment, joining ensembles that demanded versatility and confidence. Her ability to switch seamlessly between swinging standards, lush ballads, and Latin rhythms made her an in-demand pianist. One of her early triumphs came when she began leading her own trios and quartets. In an era when male band leaders were the norm, Bailey's leadership was subtle but firm. She knew how to bring out the best in her fellow musicians, giving them space to shine while anchoring the group with her precise, imaginative playing. Her performances attracted attention from critics who praised her touch at the keyboard, described as both delicate and powerful, and her deep understanding of jazz as a living language. By the late 1960s, she was expanding her creative reach. Bailey began composing original works that reflected her wide range of influences. Her compositions often married jazz improvisation with structures drawn from classical music, creating pieces that felt both fresh and timeless. Her work in this period showed that she was not content to simply interpret the jazz canon, she wanted to add to it. In the 1970s, her career reached a new dimension when she joined the Sydney Conservatorium of Music as a lecturer. This move cemented her role not only as a performer, but as a mentor. At the conservatorium, she developed a reputation for nurturing talent with patience and precision. Students recall how she encouraged them to develop their own musical identity rather than mimic established players. She often reminded them, "Jazz is about telling your own story. If you don't know who you are, you can't tell it." Her own story continued to unfold on stage and in the studio. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Bailey performed at jazz festivals around Australia and New Zealand, released acclaimed recordings, and collaborated with a range of artists from different traditions. Her ability to blend seamlessly into diverse musical contexts, whether playing with a traditional jazz combo, a symphony orchestra, or in cross-cultural projects, was a testament to her openness and adaptability. While her technical mastery was undeniable, it was her warmth and sincerity that drew people in. Audiences felt an unspoken dialogue between Bailey and her listeners, as if every note were part of a shared conversation. She did not play to impress, she played to connect. By the turn of the millennium, Bailey had become a respected elder of the Australian jazz community, yet she never lost her curiosity. She continued composing new works, experimenting with different ensemble formats, and exploring rhythms and harmonies from around the world. Her music remained rooted in jazz, but her branches reached into many other genres. The rise of Judy Bailey was not a sudden climb, but a steady ascent fueled by consistency, adaptability, and a refusal to compromise her artistic vision. She earned her place through the quiet power of mastery, commanding respect not by demanding it, but by demonstrating, night after night, what a life devoted to music could achieve. Judy Bailey's career was filled with accolades, respect, and the admiration of her peers, but her journey was not without challenges that could have easily derailed a less determined artist. When she arrived in Sydney in the early 1960s, she stepped into a jazz world dominated almost entirely by men. Women in instrumental roles were treated as novelties rather than serious contributors, and Bailey often had to prove herself repeatedly in situations where male counterparts were given the benefit of the doubt. Some club owners doubted whether audiences would accept a woman leading a band, and there were nights when she was asked if she was just filling in for the real pianist. These moments could have been disheartening, but Bailey answered them not with anger, but with music that silenced any question of her legitimacy. The life of a jazz musician also brought its share of instability. Gigs could be unpredictable, and the financial rewards were often modest compared to the amount of work and preparation required. Bailey navigated these realities while also working to establish her place as a composer and educator. Balancing performing, teaching, and composing meant long hours and little rest. And there were years when she had to carefully choose which opportunities to accept in order to keep her commitments sustainable. Her role as a trailblazer for women in jazz also carried emotional weight. She became a figure that younger female musicians looked to for guidance, which was both an honor and a responsibility. Bailey understood that her example could shape the confidence and ambitions of the next generation, and she took this seriously. But it also meant that she could never fully step away from the pressure to be a model of professionalism and perseverance. Despite these challenges, Bailey's love for music never dimmed. In fact, the obstacles seemed to strengthen her resolve. She turned moments of exclusion into fuel for creativity, channeling her experiences into compositions that reflected resilience, joy, and hope. Her music often carried a lyrical optimism, but beneath the brightness was a depth that spoke to the battles she had fought quietly for decades. Colleagues recall that Bailey never complained about the inequities she faced. Instead, she used her position to open doors for others. At the Sydney Conservatorium, she advocated for inclusive audition processes and encouraged her students, regardless of gender, to believe in their artistic worth. She often told them that music was a calling, not a competition, and that the real challenge was to stay true to oneself in an industry that often tried to mold artists into marketable products. When she passed, the outpouring of grief from across Australia and New Zealand was as much about her humanity as her musicianship. Former students spoke of her gentle but firm guidance, her willingness to listen, and her ability to make each person feel valued. Fellow musicians remembered her as a collaborator who elevated every ensemble she joined. The dark truth of Judy Bailey's story is that her success was not inevitable. It was hard-won in a world that did not make space for her easily. She had to carve that space herself, note by note, performance by performance. And while she achieved recognition and respect, it was built on decades of persistence that often went unseen. Her legacy is richer for that struggle. It is a reminder that some of the most important contributions to art come from those who have had to fight simply to stand on the stage. Judy Bailey stood there with grace, strength, and a generosity of spirit that will continue to inspire long after the final chord of her life has faded. At Legends and Secrets, we see Judy Bailey's life as proof that artistry and integrity can coexist, even in an industry that often rewards compromise over conviction. Her story is not just about becoming one of the most respected jazz pianists in Australasia. It is about how she held her ground, nurtured others, and created music that carried her unique fingerprint in every phrase. Bailey was a rare kind of leader. She did not seek attention for herself, but instead allowed her work and her collaborations to speak for her. In a profession where egos often dominate, she brought humility without diminishing her presence. That balance is part of what made her such a powerful influence on those around her. We believe her legacy lies in three core areas. First, her musicianship. Judy Bailey's piano playing was lyrical, harmonically rich, and always purposeful. Whether swinging hard in a trio or crafting a delicate ballad, she knew exactly how to shape the emotional arc of a performance. Her compositions showed the same attention to detail, crafted yet alive, structured yet flexible enough to breathe in the moment. Second, her role as an educator. Bailey's decades at the Sydney Conservatorium left an imprint that extends far beyond the walls of the institution. She championed creativity over imitation, encouraging students to explore their individuality rather than simply reproducing what was already out there. For many, she was not just a teacher, but a mentor for life, guiding them long after they graduated. Third, her quiet activism for equality in music. Though she did not often speak publicly about the gender biases she faced, her very presence as a female bandleader and respected instrumentalist was an act of defiance against outdated norms. By thriving in spaces where few women were given the chance, she created a path for others to follow. Her passing leaves a gap not only in the jazz scene, but in the cultural fabric of Australia and New Zealand. Musicians will miss her discerning ear and her generous spirit. Students will miss her guidance. Audiences will miss the unmistakable touch she brought to every performance. Now we ask you, when you think of Judy Bailey, what do you remember most? Is it the way her fingers seemed to glide over the keys, telling stories without words? Is it the calm authority with which she led a band, making everyone around her sound better? Or is it the way she believed in people, often before they believed in themselves? Whatever your answer, one truth is certain. Judy Bailey's music and mentorship will continue to resonate, inspiring future generations to play with both skill and soul. Some artists are remembered for their fame, others for their influence. Judy Bailey will be remembered for both, though in her own quiet way. She was never one to chase the spotlight, yet her light reached far, illuminating the path for countless musicians who might never have stepped onto the stage without her encouragement. Her music carried a rare warmth, the kind that makes listeners feel seen. Whether playing to a festival crowd or a small cafe, she brought the same sincerity to every note. Audiences felt that she was not simply performing for them, but sharing something personal, an invitation into her musical world. Those who studied with her remember more than her lessons on harmony or improvisation. They remember the patience with which she listened, the gentle way she offered guidance, and the quiet conviction that each person had their own voice worth hearing. She understood that the most important thing a musician can do is to be true to themselves, and she lived that truth every day. Even now, the sound of her playing lingers, the graceful turn of a melodic phrase, the subtle syncopation that made a familiar tune feel new, the stillness she could create in a room with a single sustained chord. These are the moments that defined her artistry. Some stories are never told. But now you know. Judy Bailey's legacy is not confined to her recordings, her awards, or her titles. It lives on in the musicians she mentored, in the audiences she moved, and in the communities she helped strengthen through music. It lives on in every pianist who dares to lead with sensitivity instead of volume, and in every student who takes the leap to improvise with their whole heart. This was Judy Bailey, and though the final note has faded, the melody she began will keep playing, passed from one pair of hands to the next, always carrying with it the grace, courage, and generosity of the woman who started it.